Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Tel Aviv launched its biggest and one of its most deadliest raids into the Palestinian city of Jenin on the 3rd of July. At least 12 Palestinians were killed, including 4 children, while more than 100 others have sustained some serious injuries. This latest bout of violence has been dubbed as the Israeli army's biggest assault on the Palestinians in over 2 decades, where it has resorted to using helicopter gunships in areas that are densely populated. Fierce gun battles have also been reported between the Israeli troops and the Palestinian militants. Thousands of Palestinians have been forced to flee from their homes because of the Israeli onslaught. Now, Tel Aviv interestingly describes Jenin to be a city of refuge for terrorism, but the Palestinians have accused Israel of committing war crimes in which children have been killed. The international community fears that the Palestinian cities in the West Bank will see more intense military attacks by Israel in the coming days. Our next report gets you more details.
The Jenin refugee camp near the city centre is a Palestinian refugee camp home to some 18,000 people. Established in 1953, it houses Palestinians who fled or were expelled from their homes by the Israeli forces in the aftermath of the 1948 Palestine War. This densely packed area, spread over less than half a square kilometre, has been a major flashpoint in the Israel-Palestine conflict for the last 70 years. In one of the biggest West Bank incursions in the last 20 years, Israeli army, backed by drones, hit the city of Jenin early Monday morning.
So last night we started a very focused counter-terrorism operation inside Jenin, mainly focused on the camp to dismantle infrastructure that was used by terrorists that have been leashing attacks on Israel for the last year. This has been a build-up.
A brigade-size Israeli force comprising around 1,000 to 2,000 troops were involved in gun battles with the Jenin Brigades, a coalition of militant groups based in the city's crowded refugee camp. Gunshots and explosives reverberated in downtown areas of Jenin and smoke swirled through the Jenin streets. Ambulances and other emergency vehicles were dispatched to take victims to hospitals. Drones could be seen circling over the city and the Jenin refugee camp. Until June 21 this year, when it carried out a strike near Jenin, the Israeli military had not used drones for strikes in the West Bank since 2006. An operation of this scale and intensity has not been seen in the city since the end of the second Intifada uprising in 2005. A sinister design is perceived by the Palestinian authorities behind this Israeli operation, codenamed Home and Garden.
What is happening is a new attempt to remove the camp from existence and displace its people. The heroic Jenin and its stubborn and steadfast camp are resistant to the occupation and its invasions, just like the rest of our cities, villages and camps. Our heroic people will confront this aggression that is taking place under the eyes of the international community, where innocent people are bombed by planes.
The destruction in the Jenin refugee camp following the Israeli army's biggest assault in 20 years was massive. Israel's D9 armored bulldozers crushed cars and demolished houses. Tarmac was torn up, lying everywhere in huge chunks. Many homes were left with no water or electricity. Palestinian Red Crescent, a humanitarian organization part of the International Red Cross, said it had evacuated some 3,000 people from Jenin refugee camp.
The camp is very bad. There are no roads, no infrastructure. All aspects of life have been destroyed. There is no electricity. Since early morning, we have been suffering from power outages, and therefore, there are no communications or social networking sites, and we are cut off from the world to some extent. And if the break-in lasts, it will get worse and worse.
At a time when Israel is led by the most extreme government it has known, and increasingly more and more Palestinians back armed resistance, the escalation in violence in the contested Holy Lands is exhibiting no signs of slowing down.
America, the land of the free, celebrated its 247th year of independence this week. But unfortunately, this week also marked more than 350 incidents of mass shooting in just this year alone. Cities including Baltimore, Philadelphia and Fort Worth, amongst others, came under attack in a span of less than 48 hours. At least 12 people have been killed and dozens of others have sustained injuries. America once again has been stunned and has been left baffled by this mindless and unending violence. With more guns than people, the United States has the highest rate of gun violence of any developed nation in the world. Now, surveys have established that 57% of the Americans are in favor of stricter gun laws. But the Republicans, the staunch defenders of America's constitutional right to bear arms, have repeatedly, for several years, opposed any effort to tighten the gun control measures. Our next report gets you the details.
Fourth of July holiday weekend is a festive, jovial time when Americans typically gather for parades, barbecues, and fireworks. This year, though, it began on a tragic note. At least 2 people were killed and 28 wounded in a mass shooting at a street party in Baltimore, Maryland, on the 2nd of July. Among the wounded were 14 children below the age of 18, with police still ascertaining the victim's age. The early Sunday morning carnage rattled Baltimore, a city of about 575,000 people, located 65 kilometers north of the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C. Reportedly, 20 to 30 shots were fired at hundreds of people in attendance at the Brooklyn Day block party. Still searching for multiple suspects, Baltimore Police Department urged the community to come forward with any leads to nab the culprits. Baltimore infamously has one of the highest murder rates in the country.
This was a reckless, cowardly act of violence that has taken 2 lives and altered many, many more. And as I said earlier, we will find those who are responsible, and we will not stop until we do so. Again, this tragic incident is another glaring, unfortunate example of the deep issues of violence in Baltimore, in Maryland, in this country, and particularly gun violence and the access to illegal guns.
Within 48 hours on Monday night, a 40-year-old heavily armed gunman in a bulletproof vest opened fire on the streets of Philadelphia, killing 5 people and wounding 2 boys. The shootings, believed to be random, took place over several city blocks in the southwestern neighborhood of King Sessing. Chased by the responding officers, the suspect was apprehended in an alley. The suspect did not appear to have any connection to the victims.
Our officers were able to apprehend the male in the rear alley of 1600 Fraser Street. And when they did, this male was wearing a bulletproof vest with multiple magazines in the vest. He also had a scanner and an AR-style rifle and a handgun underneath his body. He was taken into custody without further incident.
The night of horror continued with a shooting just before midnight on Monday in a parking lot in Fort Worth, Texas. At least 3 people were killed and 8 others were hospitalized, with a juvenile being among them. Reportedly, shots were fired into a crowd of hundreds, just hours after the end of Como Neighborhood's annual Como Fest, a local festival. The reason for the shooting wasn't immediately clear. Barely 24 hours later, marring the Independence Day celebration, at least 4 people were killed and 7 others were wounded in Shreveport, Louisiana, just before midnight. Once again, a gathering of more than 100 people was targeted by at least 1 gunman. No arrests have been made and the motive remains unknown. President Joe Biden issued an appeal yet again for a ban on assault weapons in remarks to the National Education Association.
Congress needs to step up, pass common sense gun safety laws to protect our kids and educators. And by the way, arming teachers is not the answer. Arming teachers is not the answer. Banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, extensive background checks, they're part of the answer. They'll make a big difference.
Guns have been woven into the very fabric of American culture and politics. Consequently, United States, a gun-obsessed nation of 330 million people, is awash with about 400 million guns. More than half of US adults have experienced a gun-related incident. And despite the fact that more than 50 people are killed each day by a firearm in the United States, the political paralysis endures. The threat of mass shooting has become a very real concern in everyday life. The land of the free is besieged with a palpable sense of insecurity and vulnerability. How many more tragedies America is willing to endure before it arrives at the final solution of stricter gun laws?
France has been engulfed in violent unrest after the point-blank shooting of 17-year-old Nahel by the French police during a routine traffic check on the 27th of June. In 6 successive nights of violence, more than 5,000 cars were torched, 99 town halls were attacked, along with schools, police stations and other public institutions. An estimated 3,354 people have been arrested in a span of a week. And what is interesting is that the average age of those who have been arrested is just 17 years. The killing seems to have tapped a deep vein of resentment against the law enforcement agencies in France, especially among the poor and the racially mixed suburbs of the French cities that are known as banlieues. The unrest, though, has failed to prompt the French government to resort to some soul-searching on key issues of racial discrimination that are prevalent in the French society. Adding insult to injury, a crowdfunding campaign spearheaded by a far-right individual has raised 1.4 million euros for the family of the policeman who shot dead the teenager. Now contrast this with the funds that have been raised for Nahel's family, which at this moment stood at 360,000 euros. Quite evidently, there are issues of race and identity that France needs to urgently resolve.
Les violences urbaines. This is a term French are fairly acquainted with. It means urban violence. A phenomena, a cycle of violence French have experienced in every decade since the 1980s. But the violent unrest triggered by the point-blank shooting of Nahel isn't just confined to the blue-collar towns and cities' disadvantaged housing projects. Mayors of France's small towns and rural communities are struggling to find this big city malaise gripping their quaint, peaceful communities. It is merely a case of one unfortunate killing of a teenager with no criminal record at the hands of an officer with poor discretion. Past incidents of killings over traffic infractions point to a disturbing pattern.
Since the death of a 17-year-old at a police road check, you've not made any political statement to tackle the issues that we face. How can a 17-year-old be killed by a policeman in the French Republic? How did 16 people wind up dead over the last year and a half after fleeing a road check when only one died in Germany in the last 10 years? And the most chilling of all, how many Nahels weren't caught on tape?
In banlieues, Muslim communities of North African descent in particular have long accused police of racial profiling and unjustified violent tactics. It was merely a matter of time before an uprising in these low-income, multi-ethnic suburbs morphed into a broader outpouring of hate and anger towards the state.
Un pays dans lequel des milliers de jeunes personnes, souvent mineurs.
A country in which thousands of youths, often minors, wreak havoc over the course of several days is a country that is unwell. Our collective and individual responsibility is to face the facts and draw conclusions. You have poor neighborhoods becoming ghettos, poverty, discriminations, substandard housing, an absence of public service, failed institutions. These recurring violent episodes carried out by a minority are a symptom of these profound difficulties.
In such a powder keg of a situation, a French far-right media personality, Jean Messia launched a fundraising effort on the US platform GoFundMe. Jean had backed far-right politician Eric Zemmour's presidential run last year. The crowdfunding campaign raised 1.4 million euros for the family of the policeman who has been charged with voluntary manslaughter. 72,000 private donations were made, far outstripping the donations made to the victim's family. Described as shameful by left-wing politicians, these donations have drawn anger from a swathe of French society.
Today we have a policeman facing preliminary charges of voluntary homicide. Voluntary homicide, this is extremely serious and he's locked up. That means he's imprisoned, and we accept and we tolerate a crowdfunding campaign launched by an activist from the far right, brings in more than 1 million euros, and we accept that this happens before our eyes. We have not had one condemnation from a minister, although they were unanimous not even 4 years ago to condemn the first crowdfunding for the yellow vests. This is immoral. You see the authority, it defines itself when it is consistent in its decisions. But here we have condemnation of the yellow vests, but tolerance when it comes to a policeman facing preliminary charges for homicide.
The far right, though, has defended a police force that allegedly is a frequent target for the violence in Ban-Louis. It's a debate that has fractured the French society right down the middle. French government needs to address these distrust and racism issues urgently before it can aspire to a single French identity for its citizenry, regardless of race and ethnicity.
The East African nation of Kenya has been rocked by anti-government protests. Now, thousands of Kenyans, in fact, took to the streets on Friday, answering an opposition call to demonstrate over a raft of controversial tax hikes. Bonfires were lit and several major roads were blockaded by the protesters. Tear gas canisters were fired to break up the protests. President William Ruto won the closely contested August 2022 elections on the promise of improving the economic fortunes of the people. But he's now accused of rowing back on those very promises. Our next report gets you the details. Kenyan police were out in full force on Friday to quell the opposition protests. Whether it was the streets of the capital city Nairobi, the coastal city Mombasa, or the lakeside city of Kisumu. Thousands of protesters poured out onto these streets, chanting, "The struggle is not over." Reportedly, more than 20 protesters were arrested by midday. Veteran opposition leader Raila Odinga's Azimio Alliance had called for these opposition protests over the impact of the new taxes on Kenyans who are already suffering from the severe cost of living crisis.
We want William Ruto to lower the cost of living so that every citizen can afford food to eat and educate their children. We do not have anything. We are working hard, but there is no money. He wants to tax the little money we have in our pockets. What will we eat? He is increasing taxes on people who have nothing. If one has money, it is okay to be taxed. We have nothing. Our young men can't even marry. They are unable to feed themselves. They are earning nothing. How will they feed those they marry?
The anti-government protests have been dubbed Saba Saba, meaning 7-7, as they took place on the 7th day of the 7th month of the year. President Ruto last week signed into law a new finance bill which is expected to generate more than $2.1 billion for the government's depleted coffers and to help repair the heavily indebted economy. But the Finance Act provides for new taxes and also increases taxes on a range of basic essential commodities such as fuel, food, and also a controversial levy on all tax-paying Kenyans to fund a housing scheme. Opposition leader Raila Odinga, who lost the closely contested presidential election last year to Ruto, has been spearheading these protests. His convoy was fired upon by tear gas by the police after he addressed a mass rally in Nairobi.
They want to destroy Azimio. We want to tell them that the strength of Azimio is not the members of parliament. The strength of Azimio is the citizens themselves. Therefore, we are starting the process of taking back the power one step at a time.
At the rally, Raila Odinga announced plans to collect 10 million signatures in a bid to remove his arch-rival Ruto. Apart from failing to tackle the soaring cost of living crisis, Odinga has accused Ruto of poaching the opposition lawmakers and attempting to reconstitute the Election Commission. Even though the implementation of the newly signed law was suspended by a court last week, a brazen Ruto's government implemented the tax hikes on petroleum products. In retaliation, Odinga issued a call for civil disobedience, asking his followers to not pay the new taxes. The ongoing demonstrations have been deemed illegal by the Kenyan police. But for an impoverished electorate that is feeling betrayed, this fight is far from over. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the Twitter handle that you're looking at on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.